Hello and welcome to another episode of the Arena Craft Podcast, a show dedicated exclusively to, you guessed it, Magic the Gathering Arena. I'm one of your hosts, Arjuna. I'm joined today by the venerable other host, Covert Go Blue. How are you doing today, CGB?
It's me. It's CGB. It's the Arena Craft Podcast. It's behind the scenes peak Friday night. There's just not many better things to be doing in a world where you can't leave your house safely.
That is a very, very good point. I have not left my house for the last 7 years. So so the pandemic was actually a boon for me because everyone else's life started to look like mine. So yeah. Well, tonight we are here, we are fresh, sipping a drink in Marrakesh, going to discuss Kaladesh because that is what is happening on Arena very, very soon. We're going to have the release of Kaladesh Remastered. I think I can speak for the both of us in saying that we're both fairly excited for this set. Now, news flash, in case anyone wasn't aware, you won't be able to play any of these cards in Standard, so this is a straight to draft, straight to historic kind of a set. But having said that, CGB, I think that there are actually a fair number of cards here that might see a splash in historic.
Here's the thing. When you're talking about competitive play, high level, high stakes, big money, MPL, you know, the stuff that the few chosen get to enjoy, there are a few cards that I think can really shake up that particular meta. But I'm going to posit something when it comes to historic. When you're talking about the Weekend Warrior, when you're talking about the After School Special, when you're talking about your typical kind of spiky but just loves Magic player out there looking for a little bit of 4-year-old nostalgia, I think that there are a lot of things you can do with this set, because historic in particular, and even ranked historic, is not all about like the top tier decks. I find it's not all about the net deck, the ladder. It's very much about a variety of things. The decks that you kind of enjoyed most getting into the game, like the first decks you created on Arena. That's what I see the most when I play historic. I see Soul Warden Johnny's Pridemate every day. Every day in historic. I see Dinosaurs from Ixalan. I see Wild Growth Walker and a bunch of Explorer cards. Like historic is built for nostalgia, and Kaladesh is bringing nostalgia big time. I am getting these flashbacks to a time when people complained about how broken cards that weren't nearly that broken were.
Long
you know what
Tusk
I mean?
Cub. Ban Long Tusk Cub.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
The things that they banned back then. They look like little house cats next to the cougars that are Omnath and Uro. Oh my
Seriously,
gosh.
people didn't know what they had to look forward to, for sure. However, I will say that this set, I think some people might actually look back to Kaladesh as being like the first broken set in the modern era, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I think before this set was released, it's kind of hard to reach back and look at a set that had as many like banned, dangerous power level kind of cards in it. So that
you have to go to Meridian. You have to go to the artifact set of Meridian for that. Yeah. There was a long stretch of unbanned stuff in Standard. I guess maybe Cawblade. I didn't really play during Cawblade and Jace. But yeah, it's kind of amazing how Kaladesh, it created so many bans. It was like one of the first set where they looked at attendance and participation events, saw it go down because the meta was so warped, and that they took action, banned cards that nowadays were like, really? That got banned? Like, really? Are you kidding? And they made the meta better through bans. And some fun history of Kaladesh is they said when they banned all those cards, that was where they revealed that they were hiring the new play design team, whose job it was to design sets and play test them so that this would never happen again. That play design team went on to build War of the Spark, Eldraine, Theros Beyond Death. And now you just look at it and you say, what happened?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too because I think part of it was that we had like one Ixalan, right? And that was all it took. Like players were like, Ixalan's weak and it sucks, and Wizards was just like, all right, scrap that. We're never going to print another weak set ever again in the history of Magic, right? They were like,
it's true.
You know, we made Homelands, you hated it. We made Ixalan, you hated it. All right, right. You know, roll out the cavalry. So that's kind of what they've been doing ever since. But I agree. I think that Kaladesh is a nostalgic set for a lot of people. I just think that the flavor was on point. The cards that didn't get banned, that people didn't hate, were still really strong and fun. And I think overall it was a really fun standard format. So yeah, I think it has a lot to offer the historic format. So where do we want to start with this, CGB? Do you want to just like briefly discuss the themes of the set and some of the mechanics?
I'm not sure how much you want to go through explaining the mechanics. I'm sure some people have never seen them before, and I think some of them are kind of complicated to explain. Do you want to like bounce back and forth and give our best like classroom presentation style with the mechanics?
Yeah,
Like which one do you? I'll let you start. Which one do you want?
Okay, I'll talk about Fabricate. I think that that's a mechanic that you're not going to see much of, but I think it's cool. Creatures that have Fabricate have a number on them, and the Fabricate number tells you how many times you get to make a choice, and the choice is +1/+1 counter or make a dude. And the dude is a 1/1 servo artifact creature. So for example, if a creature says Fabricate 1, when it ETBs, you get to decide if it comes down with a +1/+1 counter or if it makes a 1/1 servo when it comes down. Now, I think I'm right in saying that if a creature has Fabricate more than one, then you have to decide whether you get multiple counters or multiple servos. You don't get to do one of each, right? Okay, cool. So bear that in mind. One of the cards we're going to discuss today does have Fabricate too, and that will be a choice that you may have to make. So that's Fabricate. What else are we dealing with, CGB?
I think you picked a nice slow softball on that one. I'm gonna swing at the fastball and try to explain energy.
Good luck.
Yeah, energy in a nutshell is a counter that gets put on a player, but it can't be interacted with. You can't just lose energy. The opponent can't do anything that takes it away. So if you have a card that gives you 2 energy, either by resolving or by completing some kind of an effect like damaging the opponent, then you receive 2 energy counters and they sit there. And they don't do anything until you do something with them. Now, some cards will have ways to spend energy for various positive effects. There will be a card that lets you spend 3 energy counters to make a 1/1 Thopter on the battlefield. There will be a card that lets you spend 2 energy counters to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So you need cards that create the energy, and you need cards to spend it. And it's a resource, but it's not something that people can interact with, which I think is one of the only things about energy that did take away from the fun of it, is that basically you make a pile of energy and then you get there's nothing anybody can do about it, and then later when you play your energy card, it has like this tremendous potential upside. So, but yeah, energy, how'd I do? Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that was good. The only thing I want to say is that your opponent can actually interact with it if they have a card that says like add or remove a counter from a player. I don't know if we have any of those in Historic, but it's just something good to know that is, I think, the only way I can think of where people do actually interact with that.
So Solemnity says players can't gain counters.
So Solemnity may actually lock you out of energy. Yep.
It keeps you from gaining energy. It doesn't do anything to any energy you've already gained.
Right. So that could be a relevant interaction in the format. But other than that, spot on, CGB, and yes, after you play with it a few times, it'll become pretty clear. Energy was a very, very strong mechanic when it came out, and a number of energy cards were banned in the standard format. So, it's possible it could have a power level in Historic. Another main mechanic I remember from these sets was Revolt. And Revolt is basically if a permanent left the battlefield on the turn that left your battlefield on the turn that you cast that Revolt card, you get an extra effect. And so there are a number of cards in the set. There's only one that I can think of that is going to see a lot of play in Historic that uses Revolt, but it is a very important mechanic. And so cards that are the best at enabling Revolt are things like fetch lands. At the moment, the most likely fetch land you are to play in Historic would be Fabled Passage, but there are, other lands that you can sack help to do that. And then things such as treasures, food, or just like having a sack outlet in your deck. These are all other things that can enable Revolt. Or if you entered combat and a creature of yours died, that would be another example of a Revolt enabler. So just keep an eye out for that. Like I said, there's going to be at least one major card in Historic that you're going to see all over the place that has Revolt written on it. I think that covers it. Did I miss anything? Did we miss anything?
Those were the three on my mind. You crushed it.
Okay.
Boom.
Sweet. All right. So without further ado, why don't we take a look at our list of cards?
Hold on.
Okay.
I can't just... You missed such a beautiful shot. It was so set up, so perfect. Without further ado, the Arena Craft Podcast, Kaladesh Remastered. Set review.
Set review. And just so you know, we're going to skip a majority of cards in the set. However, we will discuss them at more length. And by we, I mean me and somebody else, not CGB, in an upcoming episode. Yeah, the royal we. So the first card here that I want to talk about, which may be a fun card to play in Historic, is called Angel of Invention. So this is a mythic rare creature angel, 3 white for a 2/1. So it's clearly got to have something else going on, and it does. It has Flying Vigilance, Lifelink, and Fabricate 2. So already you get to make the choice. Does this come in as a 4/3 flyer, or does it come in as a 2/1 that makes 2 1/1 artifact creatures, but then they immediately become 2/2s because the other text on this card is other creatures you control get +1/+1. So this is immediately a Flying Vigilance lifelink creature that buffs the team, and that's other creatures, so note that. And then you get to decide whether to make it a big flyer or whether to go wide and make some smaller stuff. So this card is, I think, mainly of interest because we saw it in the Godpharaoh's Gift deck in Standard. But it's a fairly powerful card. I mean, it's an Anthem, it's a flying lifelinker. I don't know, CGB, do you think that this could have a shot in the diverse meta of Historic?
It has no shot whatsoever if you cast it for 5 mana.
Agreed.
But the thing with the Godpharaoh's Gift deck, and this is something that if you didn't play back then, you're not going to know, so all the pieces sort of have to come together. Another card that's printed in Kaladesh Remastered is called Refurbish. Refurbish is 3 mana in a white sorcery to put an artifact from the graveyard onto the battlefield. So the Godpharaoh's Gift deck would cast, like, say, a turn 1 Stitcher Supplier, a turn 2 Chart the Course, a turn 3 Champion of Wits. They put all these things in the graveyard, and including a Godpharaoh's Gift. On turn 4, you would cast Refurbish. You would get the Godpharaoh's Gift. The Godpharaoh's Gift would get an Angel of Invention, right? So it's a 4/4 zombie. But then it fabricates, right? So it's a 6/6 zombie with Flying Vigilance, Lifelink, and Haste.
Oh, baby.
So you're already gaining, like, the plays I talked about don't impact the board, but as soon as you play an Angel of Invention, not only does it buff your other creatures, your Stitcher Supplier is now a 2/2, your Champion of Wits is a 3/2 if you still have them, but you also get in for 6 damage in the air and 6 life that turn. Yeah. And that's a big swing, and that's why Angel of Invention was good in those decks. Compared to like a card that they play, Ravenous Chupacabra. You get a 4/4 and you kill a thing, but often getting 6 life and dealing 6 damage on an evasive body is a lot stronger. And it has Vigilance, remember. It's there to block, too.
Yeah, so this is the kind of card that can race an Embercleave, so, just keep that in mind. That combination, that is a combo made in heaven. It's possible the Angel sees some play in some other shells, but I totally agree. I think you're probably wanting to cheat this into play, so keep an eye out for that in that deck specifically. The next card that I want to talk about, and the cycle I think that's really interesting to talk about, are the Gear Hulks. So the Gear Hulks were these big mythic artifact creatures that have a profound impact when they enter the battlefield. And they were all designed to be heavy hitters, and the majority of them did see play in Standard. And I don't know, maybe a couple of them have seen play in some older formats as well. I know Torrential Gearhulk has been a player. So we have our first Gearhulk here in terms of the white one, Cataclysmic Gearhulk. Do you want to read this for us, CGB?
3 white, 4/5 artifact creature construct. These are all mythics in the Gearhulk category. Vigilance, they all have a keyword ability that represents their color, just kind of tacked onto them. So this one has Vigilance. Way to go, White. And when Cataclysmic Gearhulk enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, then sacrifices the rest.
Yeah.
Do you remember where this saw play in Standard?
I don't. The effect is similar to a card that did see a little bit of play in Standard, Tragic Arrogance.
It's close, but it's the wrong side of Tragic Arrogance, because Tragic Arrogance, the person casting it got to make all the choices. Cataclysmic Gearhulk giving the opponent choices isn't very good. But the card did see some play with what we just talked about, Godpharaoh's Gift, because some players dealt with that deck by going super wide, super fast. And really the only good spot for Cataclysmic Gearhulk is if somehow you're forcing your opponent to sacrifice 3 or 4 permanents when it enters the battlefield. That requires someone going absurdly wide.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think of this as more of a scalpel than a cannon. So yes. I definitely wouldn't main deck it unless you have some very particular game plan that you're going for. But it's a powerful card, and if certain kinds of decks start doing very, very well in the meta, especially like a deck that is spitting out a bunch of artifacts or a bunch of enchantments, or, I mean, heck, even a bunch of planeswalkers, right? Imagine your control opponent has 4 walkers on the field and you get down a Gearhulk. That's going to feel pretty bad for them. So a card to look out for could show up.
I'm just picturing the situation you mentioned, and they're like, okay, I'll keep the one that's about to ultimate.
Yeah, it's true. It's not necessarily a game over, for sure. So yeah, maybe one of the weaker Gearhulks for Historic. Next card I want to talk about. Now, one of the cool things that Kaladesh gave the greater card pool of Magic is just a number of extremely efficient answers. There are some of the most efficient spells ever printed in Magic in this set, and this next one I'm going to read is definitely one of them. It is called Fragmentize. It is 1 white mana for a sorcery. Destroy target artifact or enchantment with converted mana cost 4 or less. So they basically don't come cheaper than this without being broken cards, and Fragmentize is definitely very, very strong when you do actually need to remove one of those things. This card has seen play in older formats because of the efficiency and because artifacts and enchantments do feature heavily in older formats. So not much else to say about this card. It's just that it's a nice thing to have in the sideboard of your white decks in Historic if there are any meddlesome, if your opponent's doing some stupid enchantment shenanigans, or if there is like a particular artifact that you just want to get rid of easily.
Yeah, I picture this as like a 1 or 2 of at most. It had to be this cheap for a narrow hate piece to be useful. And it is good at times, but you don't want too many.
Yep, agreed. And remember that CMC4 or less clause, because that really does matter. Let's see, we have a sweeper entering the format, probably not one that's going to see much play. It is called Fumigate. Why don't you read this for us, CDB?
Fumigate, 3 white. That's 1 more than Wrath of God. Therefore, the rest doesn't matter.
Yeah.
No, but it does destroy all creatures, and you can gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way, and that's not worth it. Just play Wrath of God. Yeah,
play Wrath of God. The end. CGB mentioned this card before. I'll just reread it. Refurbished, 3 and a white sorcery. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So an artifact reanimator. Just take note of this card. People are definitely going to try some kind of nonsense with this deck, cheating out expensive artifacts, getting back their Godpharaoh's Gift, etc., etc. So that's definitely a place that this card could show up.
There are cards like Gear Per Orrery. There are cards like Platinum Angel, Akroma's Memorial that haven't been in a format with this card on Arena, so
Yeah.
there's some nonsense besides God Pharaoh's Gift that we could see.
Yep, nonsense, combos, shenanigans, basically. When you look at this card, just think shenanigans. And especially if you're if you're starting a match against someone in Historic and they're discarding some random expensive artifacts, this is the card in the back of your mind that you're waiting for.
Yeah, I am trying to think of just how busted is Refurbish on Gear per Orrery, because you can tap it for 5 mana immediately, and the next turn you have 10 mana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
10 mana.
Heck of a ramp strategy, for sure.
And it fixes all colors.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows?
No, it's true. I'll read this one for us because this, maybe not now, but eventually could be a player in Historic. SRAM Senior Edificer.
SRAM Senior Edificer is going to be a player on day 1. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary dwarf advisor. When you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. This card goes into the deck with Core Spirit Dancer and Curiosity and Staggering Insight and Sentinel's Eyes and all that other crap. And that deck was already nuts, but it was containable. If they didn't draw Core Spirit Dancer, they were vulnerable, or if you killed it fast enough, they were vulnerable. So Ram is like another Core Spirit Dancer effect. It's going to make that deck even better and more miserable to play against.
Good call. Yeah, good call. I mean, I'll tell you what, I will feel a lot more excited about casting a Sky Maul or a stupid frickin' Colossus Hammer if I have SRAM in play. So,
ooh, Sky Maul, yeah, that's a curve.
Yeah, baby.
Ooh,
you know?
Okay. All right, good card, man. Good card.
Yeah, SRAM is just this card has possibilities, all right? People are gonna try everything with this card, and like you said, CGB, it'll probably stick in some decks that we already know of. Okay, so next card I want to talk about here is Toolcraft Exemplar. This is an artifact Nakatl, as it were. It's a 1 white for a 1/1 dwarf artificer at rare. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control an artifact, Toolcraft Exemplar gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So it's just any artifact. If you control 3 or more artifacts, it also gains first strike until end of turn. So this is like White's version of Thieves Guild Enforcer, and we've all gotten to see how strong that card can actually be. So this card was definitely a player in Standard back when the Vehicles deck was big, and CGB, you seem to think that this could be seeing some play in Historic as well?
I think that the Vehicle deck will have a shot. The deck was incredibly strong in its time, and the mana is going to be very good. Almost better than it was then. Mardu Vehicles was usually what we saw, and we've got plenty of cards that we'll talk about that could fit into the deck. This is the first one. The biggest thing on this is that you have to have an artifact to make it good. I don't think that will be a problem. Vehicles in the set are artifacts, and there's plenty of them, and there's plenty of powerful ones. So once we get to some of the vehicle cards, then you'll understand better. I think people who have only seen Vehicles in the most recent sets are like,
yeah.
They don't understand.
They did not live through the pain.
Vehicles were once ferocious and vicious, and their stats, like the stats you're going to hear on these cards, are absurd. And Toolcraft Exemplar is a key, like turn 1 play, and then turn 2 you're attacking for 3, and you play a 2 mana like 4/4, and then turn 3 you're attacking with the 4/4 and the 3/2, and it just gets crazy. So I think there's a chance we'll see this.
Think about a curve like this, right? Exemplar into SRAM into Sky Maul. That's a pretty potent curve even in a format as fast as Historic. So again, this is a card with a lot of possibilities. It wears equipment very, very well.
Also, white dwarves.
Yeah, it's true.
Just saying.
Yeah.
They did white mummies, white zombies in Amonkhet. They did white dwarfs in Kaladesh. So, some people might be surprised.
Yeah, the Dwarven tribe definitely getting some reinforcement in Historic. We'll still see how many other relevant dwarves we have to work with here. All right, that's going to wrap us up for the color of white. Now let's get into the color of blue. And the first card that I want for you to take us through, CGB, is a somewhat on-brand card, I would say, Brawl, Chief of Compliance.
Barrel. No, it is Brawl, but I just say Barrel. Do a barrel roll. Chief of Compliance, 1 blue for a 1/3 legendary human wizard. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card.
So meme or dream?
So I never played much Brawl. It's on brand for me because, blue cards, instants and sorceries, but I generally don't like tapping mana on my turn. This card though is pretty good. It got banned in regular Brawl. Time will tell if it gets banned in historic Brawl. The thing that I'm wondering is there some broken combo deck? We'll get to paradoxical outcomes soon. Does this card fit into like a deck with paradoxical outcome that can draw a million cards very quickly? Is there another card where the reduced cost is insane? Because is it good enough to reduce like escape costs on Glimpse of Freedom and empty your graveyard? I don't know. Like, some people will be trying to find a way to make this card amazing. I'm not sure it's there, but the historic meta is ripe for a good Stormat-like combo deck. It's just kind of lurking. And we're going to have Brawl and Mox Amber in the same format, and it does seem like it could get messed up.
Yeah. It's also a wizard, and there continue to be like a parade of powerful wizards and wizard synergies entering Arena in general. So that's just another thing to keep an eye out for. We already have some cost reduction wizard shenanigans going on. So, yep, things are just, bargain prices continue at the Wizard Academy in Historic. So,
Wizard Academy is next spring.
That's
so
true.
Know.
We're going to get a massive influx there. So, yeah, man, I don't know. But this is the power level is there. So we just have to see if the combo pieces are there. But if history has taught us anything, it's that when you take 2 mana spells and you reduce the cost to 1 mana spells, they get very, very, very powerful. So we could see definitely a bunch of cantripping, storming, etc. kind of stuff going off with Brawl. And yes, for those of you who play historic Brawl, this is definitely a card to put on your short list of decks to build and quickly get banned. So another thing that Kaladesh is bringing, and I'm sure this just makes you salivate at the thought of it, CGB, to historic, is a number of very playable counterspells. The first of which, while admittedly a narrow card, is a very strong card. This is called Ceremonious Rejection. This is a 1 blue instant. It says counter, target, colorless spell. So, a number of things you can do with this card are, for example, you can counter your opponent's Ulamog for 1 mana. Granted, it doesn't cancel the exile clause, but it does mean you don't have to deal with the 10/10 annoying creature. This can counter your opponent's Giripa Orrery, for example. It's one of these things where maybe it doesn't see any play in Historic just because there are no important colorless spells to counter, but it's a good card to know about.
Oh, what's that? I couldn't hear you over the sound of a crying Ugin.
Oh, Ugin. There we go. Yep, Ugin's a solid one.
Actually, we're going to get to probably the key card that this countered in Standard during its time, which is Aetherworks Marvel, but that we'll talk about that in a little bit. Disallow is probably the best 3-mana counterspell ever printed.
Yeah, okay, so take us through this, CGB.
Disallow is 1 blue for an instant counter target spell, activate ability, or triggered ability. Doesn't sound like a huge diversion from cancel, which is just 3-mana counter target spell. But just the way it changes the game when you can counter an activated ability or triggered ability is kind of amazing. A good example, the way that this worked in Standard when it was legal, is people were just scared to ultimate their planeswalkers.
Yeah.
Just scared to -7 their Chandra for the emblem that would kill the opponent, because if you have a disallow, you give up your planeswalker for nothing. And it made games that otherwise seemed like runaways. If the opponent even bluffed disallow, people just wouldn't make optimal plays.
Yeah.
They couldn't. And it was actually pretty amazing. And I think that this will work its way in some numbers into historic blue decks.
Absolutely. So one of the benefits of a card like this, Okay, we've seen this kind of thing before, but it usually comes on situational or fairly unplayable cards, like Tail's End. So cards like Tail's End are really difficult to main deck because they're just a bit too focused, but Disallow is not. So the fail case on Disallow is you just counter your opponent's spell, and it costs 3 mana, which is not the worst in a format like Historic. But what playing this card allows you to do is also be able to answer just a wide range of interesting scenarios. So some different interesting things you could do. You could just counter your opponent cracking a Fabled Passage, which could be a minor play, but in some cases it could be a game-winning play, especially if your opponent's already mana screwed. Disallow can allow you to do things like, let's say that your opponent is playing a card that I have enjoyed, Demonic Pact. Maybe they're trying to doom it, right? Doom Foretold it. You can disallow the Doom Foretold activation. So there's just like a number of tricky things you can do. CGB, I'm sure you've just been stockpiling a list of fun things to do with Disallow.
Yeah, when the 9 lives trigger says that you lose the game, I'm just going to disallow that.
There you go. It's pretty nice.
Or any of those other lose the game triggers, Chance for Glory. Or when my opponent Yorian's 15 permanents, including their Demonic Pact, I'm just going to disallow the return to battlefield trigger. And keep them exiled.
Exactly.
Yep. Oh, yeah. This is a fun card.
It's fun, and it's very powerful. And it's another thing where, let's say that your opponent casts that Ulamog, and you're like, I don't care about the creature, but I just don't want to lose my 2 planeswalkers or whatever, or I don't want to lose 2 lands. You can just disallow the cast part of the Ulamog and then ECD it next turn or something.
Right. I love that we just don't, you are a better control mage than you let on. First you called Disallow fun, then you said we just don't care about the 10/10 indestructible. You're a good blue mage. You're doing well.
I've played enough control to know that creatures aren't generally the problem by the time in the game where an Ulamog's coming down. So keep an eye out for Disallow. You're going to get owned by this card. I mean, I promise you, there will be a point in the next month if you play Historic where you're going to yell at your monitor in disbelief and you will lose the game because of Disallow. So have fun expecting that. All right, CGB, we have another counterspell for us. Why don't you read this one?
Metallic Rebuke is 2 and a blue with Improvise. Did we explain that one to the kiddos?
Oh, I guess we didn't. We missed that. So, yeah.
We missed that. Improvise is like Convoke for artifacts. Basically, you can tap an untapped artifact when you cast the spell to pay for the mana cost. So, if you have 2 artifacts on the battlefield that are untapped and you would like to tap those, you can play Metallic Rebuke for 1 blue mana. And it says counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. So in theory, a 3, 2, or 1 mana counter target spell mystical dispute type effect.
Okay, so here's what I want to say about this card. I don't know this is going to be great in Historic. However, this card has a power level that has been seen in older formats. So don't just write this one off. It can be an extremely, extremely powerful card. But Historic is not necessarily a format in which we're playing a bunch of cheap and 0-cost artifacts. So
where's Oko? Where's Oko when you need him? Oko could have been the king of Historic. That's what he needed. Oko needed a little bonus. He needed a little help.
Yeah.
He wasn't good enough.
Nope. Yeah, he wasn't good enough for Vintage. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, Metallic Rebuke is the missing link, I guess.
I guess this card with Cat Oven is kind of a tilt,
pretty
right?
good, right?
Yeah, we'll see.
I'm just saying, man, I think this card's going to show up somewhere, and when it does, it's going to be pretty good.
Paradoxical Outcome is 3 and a blue for an instant rare. And it says return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hand. Draw a card for each card returned to your hand in this way. So, I've played a ton of this card in various combo decks. Have you played a lot with this card?
No. However, I have watched a lot of play with this card. And this card can do many, many things in many, many formats. So I have a lot of respect for how powerful this card is.
Ideally, in Historic, we're probably looking at a deck with Psy Master Thopterist, so that every time an artifact enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 Thopter. And then you play Mox Ambers, you probably play Glint Nest Crane, you play Ornithopter. And hopefully there's some other cheap like artifacts that I'm forgetting about. I'm just going to say Ginger Brute, but play something better than that. And you play these cards, and you put a bunch of them on the battlefield. Then you cast Paradoxical Outcome, return the cheap ones to the owner's hand, and then replay them with the Psy. You get to make a bunch of Thopters. You draw a bunch of cards from the outcome, hopefully another outcome, and you get to do this basically again and again. It's kind of this endless value train of things entering the battlefield to gain value. Then when they leave the battlefield, you draw more cards to do more of that. This card, when it was in Standard, had a key combo piece called Inspiring Statuary, I believe, which is it was in Kaladesh and was
has
not
been reprinted.
Printed.
Yep.
So, do we have the tools? I'm not sure, but it's one of those things where you just have to try.
Yeah.
It calls me.
It gets you so much, right? It gets you rebuys on your ETB effects. Even just doing something as simple as buying back a Torrential Gearhulk will make some people salivate. So yeah, it's definitely more of a combo card than anything else, but just the overall power level of it is too strong to be ignored.
It seems really interesting with Underworld Breach, doesn't it?
Oh,
that you can play all those. You can play all those zeros from your graveyard until your graveyard's empty. Then you can Paradoxical Outcome to get back the Underworld Breach and the zeros that you played from the graveyard.
That's pretty devilish. This card does combine very, very well with cheap mana rocks and Moxen and stuff. So, yeah, a deck full of Mind Stones, Mox Amber, if there are any other cheap mana rocks in Historic, is just that's a great starting point for a combo deck right there. And then you can just, you can kind of build out your combo suite accordingly. But yeah, there will be one or more outcome decks in Historic as soon as the set is released, and I guess it'll just be up to us to figure out how good they are. All right, CGB, I want you to do the honors with us on this card because I know this is a card you are going to try, so lead us through it.
T-Hulk, Torrential Gearhulk, 4 blue, mythic, artifact creature, construct, 5/6 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. What, do you think this is good or something?
This card has occasionally been good in the past.
I mean, okay, returning an instant, like in Standard, was pretty dominant. You had Disallow. You had Vraska's Contempt, which exile things, gain 2 life. You had Glimmer of Genius, draw 2, put 2 on the bottom. And in Standard, it was pretty hard to beat that much value, and the 5/6 on its own could be a win con. I don't think the 5/6 on its own is going to be much of a reliable win con for Historic, nor do I think 6 mana is automatic. But I think Historic is going to have some freaking nutty instance to bring back. The one that comes to mind that was not in Standard when this card was is Sublime Epiphany.
That was my first thought.
Can copy the Gearhulk and draw a card and counter a spell and bounce another permanent to continue the chain for as many Sublime Epiphanies as you can somehow relocate into your graveyard. Because if you copy the Gearhulk to target another Sublime Epiphany, you keep going.
You keep going. That's what I'm saying. So this is another one of those cards where casting it for face value is good, but if you have additional powerful stuff to do with it, it just starts to get totally nutty. If you have ways to blink it, it gets very, very good. I mean, imagine Yorianing your Gearhulk, dude.
Yeah, I am wondering, and I'll probably try this. Remember the Angel of Invention Godfarer's Gift deck that we talked about?
Yes.
What if our whole plan was just Stitcher's Supplier, Chart a Course, throw our deck into our graveyard, but instead of getting Angel of Invention, we're getting back Torrential Gearhulk, who is activating Sublime Epiphany or something else to make several copies all at once, and just do that value explosion on turn 4.
Absolutely. And you can refurbish the Gearhulk, so that's a thing you could do if you have a graveyardy strategy.
Yep.
Yeah, this card, the power level is there. Whether the mana cost and everything lines up with the format, who knows? Whether you want another 6-cost card that does big things in your deck, who knows? But this is definitely one of the cards that I'm going to be looking to as like, this could just be another powerful mid-range threat in like your value deck or like a chonky control deck. Yeah, and it has a lot of combo possibilities as well.
Yeah, people have talked about, even though it's banned, they were talking anyway about wilderness reclamation.
Sure.
You know, but I mean, in standard, like this card existed with, like there's still Nissa for mana doublers if you want to play this with Nissa, and there's still Scarab God, which this card in standard was best friends with.
Yeah. To
just get instant speed Gear Hulks from the graveyard. It's going to be fun. If you've got the mythics, it's going to be fun.
Just like it's got to be a consideration for Yorion decks, right? I mean, think about like Elspeth Conquers Death buying this back from the graveyard. That's gas, dude. That's such gas.
As long as you've got some sweet instants. I mean, that is the catch, right?
That is
you
the
need
catch.
instants.
It's an incentive anyway. It's an incentive to play some sweet instants. So, all right. So let's move on to black here. We have reached the card, which I think a lot of people think is the most important inclusion in Historic from the set, and it is none other, the one, the only, Fatal Push.
You want to read it?
I do. So, Fatal Push. An instant for 1 black mana at uncommon. Destroy target creature if it has converted mana cost 2 or less. But wait, there's more. This employs the Revolt mechanic we were talking about earlier, and this is definitely the main Revolt card you're going to see in Historic. So, Revolt, again, that is, if a permanent left the battlefield under your control on the turn that you cast this, you can destroy that creature if it has converted mana cost 4 or less, okay? So, this kills 2 CMC or less in the vanilla version, and then if you did something like crack your Fabled Passage, or one of your things died, or you sacrifice, whatever, you get to destroy something of CMC 4 or less at instant speed for 1 mana. If you have never had the pleasure/dismay of playing against this card, you are in for a rude awakening. This is probably the most, I won't say the most, but it is one of the most efficient removal spells ever printed. And this is definitely a card that sees play in many, many, many formats. So it's just unbelievably powerful. Having your control opponent Fatal Push your first creature and basically just kind of steal the initiative back of the game, you can just lose on the spot right there. So I don't know. Tell me, CGB, what you're thinking about with this card in Historic.
Well, first of all, to people out there who think it's like worse Blood Chief's Thirst because they can't kick it, I will say don't underestimate the power of instant speed. It is insanely helpful when you consider how the opponent could Shark Typhoon out a 12/12 Shark, and if you're looking at a sorcery speed card in your hand, you could be dead, or you're looking at Fatal Push, and that's not a big deal, 1 mana, solved it, then you get an idea of what's going on. Same thing, this says destroy target creature, not non-land, blah, 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 so this shoots down Nissa lands on the spot in combat, which is very, very
Pretty
nice.
good.
So we need to tell the people, because I guarantee this is going to happen so many times on day 1. You can target any creature, but you only destroy it if its converted mana cost matches the requirement of 4 or less if you have Revolt and 2 or less if you don't. So if I Fatal Push a 5 casting cost creature, like that's a legal play you can make. It just won't kill it.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact, because I've been there. I've been there, guys. Like a mere mortal. I've been there. You just cast your Fatal Push and it just like hits the thing and bounces off. And you're like, what happened? So just because the Fatal Push is lit up and holding priority doesn't mean it's going to work.
Correct. Yeah, it's kind of in the same camp as when you resolve your Elspeth Conquers Death and nothing happens to your opponent's board, and you're like, oh, damn it. So, yeah, keep an eye out on that for sure. This is definitely a card in general where, like, double check that you revolted the thing. You know what I mean? Double check the costs, double check the revolt, double check everything. Just frickin' make sure that you actually did what you intended to do when you cast it. Because there's going to be a lot of user error on this one, I predict.
Agreed.
Yeah, but powerful card, craft 4, don't look back. Put them in your black decks. I guarantee you this card is going to be absolute gas. There are some cards in the set that we already got, so we're skipping over them, such as Gonti and Gifted Aetherborn, which are definitely interesting cards, but we've already covered them. Noxious Gearhulk, CGB, why don't you read this for us?
Noxious Gearhulk, the black addition to the Gearhulk family, is 4 black for a 5/4 menace artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy another target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. Big fatty chupacabra.
Yeah, this is one where, like, it didn't see that much play in Standard. I imagine it's seeing even less play in Historic. Is there a place for it?
No.
Yeah.
There's better ways, cheaper ways, and more efficient ways to kill creatures than paying 6 mana. And the 5/4 Menace body, I'm trying to think of what stats it would have to be good, but 5/4 Menace ain't it.
Yeah, maybe if it was like a 7/6, we could be talking. Maybe. But yeah, 6 mana, y'all. 6 mana, it turns out, is a lot of mana, especially in a format like Historic, where you could be doing... I mean, like, would you rather cast Nissa on 5 or this on 6? I know the answer that I can come up with. The cost is really the killer on this one. Moving on to red, here's another card I want you to read, CGB, because I know that you have thoughts on this one. Take us through one of the best Chandras ever printed, Chandra Torch of Defiance.
Dude, I don't want to read it. It's got 4 abilities. So much tax. Okay. 2 red, 4 loyalty, Chandra Planeswalker. Get out your notebooks. +1, exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, Chandra Torch of Defiance deals 2 damage to each opponent. +1, add red to your mana pool. -3, Chandra Torch of Defiance deals 4 damage to target creature. -7, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to any target. That's a lot of abilities on a Planeswalker.
Indeed. Yeah, so Chandra basically packs your lunch, does your taxes, and cleans the rats out of your sewage. So, yeah, there's no question this is a very, very powerful Planeswalker. Don't underestimate this card. If you've never played with or against this card, it's just better. However good you think this card is, it's better than you think. So the real question is, how does it fit into Historic?
I don't know. I think that red decks, like red aggressive and red burn decks, could all benefit from 2 or 3 copies in the 75 somewhere. I wonder if there's a place for Jund decks to play this possibly as well out of the sideboard as an alternative threat. And I'm trying to also think of where the +1 for the mana really fits in well, because there's probably something like that in the format. The red-black vehicle decks, she was an all-star in those decks because she can crew Heart of Kirin, which is another card we're getting to. Maybe those vehicle decks will still run her. She's one of the best red planeswalkers. Can you think of another, like a better red planeswalker?
I can't. Yeah, off the top of my head, I really can't. It's probably the best Chandra ever.
So yeah, she needs to be somewhere in the 75 of the aggressive red strategies that want to maybe get a little more card advantage-y and mid-rangey after sideboards. But I feel like there's something I'm missing.
Yeah.
I feel like there's also another place where Chandra can go to town.
Yeah, well, okay, so if there's any kind of like big red deck or like chunky red deck, then Chandra's going to fit right into that. I mean, she does essentially bridge you from 5 mana to 7 mana on the turn you untap with her. So if you're trying to do any kind of go over the top big red strategy, you should definitely be playing her.
I'm thinking of, like, remember all the Chandra tribal cards?
Yes.
From what was that, M19? And we got like Chandra's Pyre Cat or something that just taps for a red to cast a Chandra card, and there's Chandra's Regulator, which duplicates the activated ability of a Chandra. It's like you could bring it all back with a really good freaking Chandra.
This card has mid-range written all over it, so basically any red deck that wants any kind of mid-range game, either pre or post board, definitely needs to be running it. I don't know, in any like Jeskai control deck, you'd probably want to be running some number of these, right?
Tap out version, totally. And an Elspeth Conquers Death could get it back. The +1 gets you to 7 mana. What can you do with that? Inspired Ultimatum! I'm living in magical Christmas land. Or you could slam a Shark Typhoon. I don't know.
Yep.
It's interesting.
Yep. And one of the things to remember about this card is that 2 damage from the first +1 ability adds up quite quickly. So it can be a good finisher, like you said, in aggressive decks. Yeah, it's just a very, 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 very solid card.
If we're going to complete the cycle on the Gear Hulks, I have to say that this is one of the timmiest cards of all time. like in the world I lived in Magic Duels, people would just this card, this freaking card, man. I can't tell you how many times I've lost to this card.
Okay. Well, do us the honors and read it then.
Oh, okay. 4 red combustible Gear Hulk, 6/6 first strike, artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If the player doesn't, AE chooses not to have you draw 3 cards. You mill 3 cards instead, and combustible Gear Hulk deals damage to the player equal to the total mana cost of those cards.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful effect. I don't think any competitive player is going to look twice at this card, but...
I mean, okay, we're going to get to a card that duplicates triggered abilities. There's like Yarok and things like that. True. I've seen things, dude. I've been scarred, okay? I have thought I was fine, and my opponent flipped over Ulamog and Ugin. And
yeah, just
18
to the face. Yes. It can happen. Well, and here's the thing, right? Can. People who play 1 combustible Gear Hulk usually can't but help playing 4. So your opponent flipping another Gear Hulk is already pretty bad news for you.
Yeah, this card it's what nightmares are made of. Because I can sit here and tell people it's bad all I want, but somebody's going to get me with it, and they're never going to let me forget it.
I mean, it hurts. It hurt. Like, either side of it hurts, right? 6 mana, 6/6, draw 3 cards. That's a pretty good card, all right?
Yeah, it is.
And then 6 mana, 6/6, deal your opponent hopefully 5 to 10 damage. Maybe not quite as good, but still very, very good. I mean, okay, here's the problem. Like, when I play this card, it's just never going to deal my opponents any damage ever, if it even resolves. So.
Oh, likewise. The same. Yes, I've never killed somebody with combustible Gear Hulk. I've never done anything interesting with combustible Gear Hulk. These are the things that only happen to you, not for you.
Exactly. So take notes of that, players. If you're the kind of person who, always nuts on your opponent when you're playing your stupid red deck, then stop building with this card.
You know who you are, nutters. No, I mean, is the glass half full or half empty? That's the question you ask before crafting this card.
If you're one of those people who plays that 14 mountain red deck and gets away with it, then you're the kind of person who needs to play this card. This next card could be an interesting inclusion in aggro red decks. So why don't you read this for us, CGB?
Karizev, Skyship Raider, 1 and a red, 1/3, first strike menace, legendary, human pirate, at rare. When Karizev attacks, create Ragavan, a 2/1 legendary red monkey creature token. Ragavan enters the battlefield tapped and attacking, and exile that token at the end of combat. So, in a nutshell, you have a 1/3 first strike menace for 2 that when it attacks, you get this other 2/1 attacker thingy, and now the opponent has to block the 2 bodies or stop them somehow. It's actually, if you put it together, it's 3/3 power in stats for 2 mana, with some of it having first strike and menace. The part that you want to kill is harder to block.
Yeah, this is... Okay, so right off the bat, this card's pretty sweet in an Embercleave deck, right?
2 bodies, cheaper Embercleave. The sword is lit. We are legit. And you can play it with the mana from your Burning Tree Emissary.
Oh, baby, you are talking. Yeah, that's true. This does definitely open up like turn 3 Embercleave pretty consistently, I would say.
Yeah, even without Llanowar Elves,
Yep.
it does.
Yep, so that's pretty gas. If you're thinking about like blocking, if you're someone who likes blocking, it takes exactly 3 creatures to be able to block all of the damage from Karizev. So yeah, not a fun card for anyone who's trying to block.
And that 3 toughness gets around Stomp.
Yeah,
right?
it's true.
Gets around the Bone Crusher Giants.
It's true. And if you have, any other kind of buffing that can happen, if you're running like a Rimrock Knight style of a deck, this is a very, very good card to play with buffs. So, yeah, overall, Karizev, there's a lot to like about her.
It feels like you just can't ever block her. Ever. Because if she's on the field, you're probably threatening Embercleave with her attack already. So if they do put 2 creatures in front of her that are going to kill her through the first strike anyway, and then Embercleave comes in,
yeah.
Oh my god. That's just so bad.
Yeah,
it's
rough.
That's a train wreck.
It's rough.
Like, she's unblockable.
She does have low power, so that's something to consider. With an Embercleave, she doesn't get very big, which kind of sucks. But that's probably about the only knock on Karizev, I would say. Just also another side note, if you can figure out like ways to make her unblockable, or if you're trying to sky maul her or something, she could get very annoying because she basically becomes like a Geist of Saint Traft. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to like about Karizev.
Geist of Saint Traft. I hope we have that in Arena someday. For now, you're just a boomer for mentioning it.
That has got to enter Historic at some point, right? Oh my god, what a nightmare. So, I don't know, is it time for us to just talk about energy? Because the first card on this list, is a card that was banned, and if energy is playable in Historic, this card will definitely be in the deck. So, let's talk about Attune with Aether. 1 green mana, sorcery, search a library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. You get 2 energy. So this card was basically, in the energy deck, it basically read, you get 2 free energy.
Yeah.
That was the basic outcome of running this card in your deck, which it turned out ended up being a bannable offense.
Yeah, they banned Attune with Aether because it was one of the cards that produced energy at very low cost and then made all the energy cards that you could play around it just, I guess they thought, too good. I think the real thing about that format and the energy mechanic, I don't know if it's busted by current standard, but it was busted by what surrounded it. Like, why would you play a regular game of Magic when you could instead be playing this version of Magic where you have this extra resource in the background and all your cards were just a little bit above rate because of it? And Historic, I don't think, is going to have that problem of the rest of the format not being able to keep up with the energy cards. We're going to talk about some of these energy cards. They're not particularly intimidating. Bristling Hydra is sitting here next to Attune with Aether. It's a 2 green 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy, and you can pay 3 energy to put a counter on Hydra, and it gains hexproof until end of turn. And in its time, this was considered an extremely annoying card in Standard. And in Historic, I picture this being like obnoxious, but at 4 mana, I just think the opponents are just going to be ramping over the top with Nissa and Krasis, and they're going to play Uro, and it feels like they're not going to care about Bristling Hydra very much.
Yeah, Goblins doesn't give a fluff about Hydra.
Oh man, Muxus is down, you can have your 4/3. I'm coming with the team. And it just seems like everything is bigger than the energy deck with one exception. And that, I don't know how deep you want to go before we get to it. It's at the end because it's an artifact. And that's Aetherworks Marvel. Now, the Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner, another card we're going to talk about, were banned in an era of energy when energy was actually, by modern standards, a pretty fair mid-range deck. It early game was about a little bit of advantage, mid game was about play a few threats, and late game was about grinding out advantage with your energy that you accumulated and some card draw. Actually, that got banned because it was the only good deck going on and people found it boring. and it was a long standard rotation, 2 years of just playing the same cards. You could say it was the Teamer Adventure deck of its time, in a way. Clover was banned for similar reasons. So I don't think this is broken, but the version that might have been broken was the Aetherworks Marvel version, which basically converted the energy into these giant free spells.
Yep. Yeah, the Aetherworks Marvel Ulamog combo was a classic turn 4 kill, basically. So we'll probably get to that in more detail coming up. But this is something to pay attention to as we start talking about these energy cards, is just that they're more powerful than the sum of their parts. Whenever you read any of them, you think, oh, that looks pretty good. But just bump all the energy cards up like 10 to 20% because they're just better than you think they are. So we read the Attune with Aether, we read one of the payoffs, Bristling Hydra. Sandwiched in between the two of these, I did just want to mention Blossoming Defense. We complained about this not being reprinted in Standard, but we do get it in Historic, and it is a fairly strong spell. 1 green mana, instant, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains hexproof until end of turn. So one of the best combat tricks ever printed. Blanks an opponent's removal spell, makes your creature massive. If you are thinking about running Ranger's Guile in Historic, then Blossoming Defense is just almost strictly better. I don't know, a solid probably inclusion in the sideboard of like a green Stompy deck if you're playing against Control. So whether or not this shows up, I don't know, but it's a powerful enough card. I think it's worth knowing that it exists. CGB, do us the honors. One of the main energy payoff creatures, Long Tusk Cub, what does it do?
It's 1 and a green for a 2/2 cat, and when Long Tusk Cub deals damage to a player, you get 2 energy. Now you may pay 2 energy at any time to put a +1/+1 counter on Long Tusk Cub. A little bit of a Whirling Dervish Dreadhorde Butcher action going on where it hits the opponent and you can put a counter on it, but it's optional. You can also just stockpile the energy. In the decks that were aggressive with energy, this was immediately a threat. Turn 1 Attune with Aether, turn 2 Long Tusk Cub was already potentially a 3/3 attacker that threatened to get bigger or just stockpile more energy every turn. I'm curious to see if that holds up.
On a good day, Long Tusk Cub was basically Tarmogoyf. It's a card that can be answered, and if Long Tusk Cubs start running away with the format, we have Fatal Push to kind of rein them in a little bit. It's hard to imagine this card again being as good as it used to be.
I'm not very enthusiastic for the Cub, to be honest.
Yep. Magic's just come a ways since this card was printed, but it was very strong, and if an energy deck is good, then we could very well see it return.
I think we could see it in the Aetherworks Marvel decks as a sideboard swerve, right? Mm-hmm. People take out their Fatal Pushes because they're up against an Ulamog trick deck, and in comes Long Tusk Cub.
Yeah.
And just got him on turn 2.
It is the perfect juke for sure.
It is.
So, yeah. It's a versatile card, and it does note that it does power itself up. So every time it deals damage, you get 2 more energy. So if it goes unchecked, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Is this Nissa worth talking about?
Well, do you like if you've already got 4 Nissas in your deck and you want number 5, this is probably your number 5 Nissa, Vital Force. This is 3 and a green with 5 loyalty. Nissa Planeswalker at Mythic. The +1 untaps. Stop me if you've heard this before. Untap target land you control until end of turn. That is important. Or until end of next turn. I'm sorry. No, until your next turn.
Your next turn. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all this stuff is different, and it's all important, dang it. Until your next turn, it's a 5/5 elemental with haste that's still a land. You can block with it, but then it goes back to normal eventually. The -3 is return target permanent card from the graveyard to your hand, and the -6 is you get an emblem with whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. There are 5 loyalty on this Planeswalker. And it's a -6 for that emblem that whenever you play a land, you draw a card.
Comes up quick.
I'm going to mention that because there's this card called Elspeth Conquers Death that brings a Planeswalker out with an additional loyalty counter.
Snap, that is
so
nasty.
You can make the emblem right away, and for the rest of your hopefully dirtily control mage life, draw a card with every land drop you hit.
Okay, you have my attention with that one combo right there. I mean, a 5/5 haste when she comes down is pretty banging, right? Like, pay 5, get a 6 loyalty planeswalker, and a 5/5 haste creature.
Like she can go kill a Teferi, Hero of
yeah.
Dominaria, if they aren't prepared for that. Yeah.
Definitely. And if you don't feel like attacking with that land, it does block. So that's the thing to remember as well. And then she has a Balaged recovery on her as well. So overall a strong card. I don't know though. I mean, like I think that's the real question is, do you want Nissa number 5?
I mean, there are things I want to do with Nissa number 5. I'll use the -3 to get the Elspeth Conquers Death back. Then they'll attack my Nissa. Then I'll ECD their threat. Then I'll get back the Nissa. Okay, the dirtily control mage in me loves this, but is it actually going to be tier 1 historic? Do you actually need more Nissa? Probably not, to be honest. But why not? If you're down for using a mythic wildcard to do something different for a change, have some fun. Play Nissa.
I mean, that emblem combined with Oros and all that kind of other stuff, or Fabled Passages or whatever, is going to get out of control super, super fast. I don't know. There's a lot to like about Nissa Vital Force. Yeah, you had me at ECD, basically.
And I know you love that card.
I do love that card. Asterisk. Okay. Let's get back to another Gearhulk, which I actually could see some play. I don't know. Verdurous Gearhulk, 3 green, artifact creature, mythic, 4/4, trample. When Verdurous Gearhulk enters the battlefield, distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. So this card is in fact a beating. It either comes down as an 8/8 trample, or just completely powers up your team and does all kinds of other stuff. So in my green Stompy decks, I'd definitely be considering running at least one of these. I don't know, though. I mean, I wouldn't say, I don't know if this is powerful enough for Historic, but it was definitely a haymaker in its time.
I would never play this without the ability to abuse the +1/+1 counter synergy somehow. Conclave Mentor and Winding Constrictor are options.
Yep.
They did not print Walking Ballista, which I think was the best thing, the BFF for this card that made it very good. So Walking Ballista could turn +1/+1 counters into direct damage to any target. And without that, I'm not very high on Verdurous Gearhulk, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. The base power level of the card is very strong, and like you said, if you have something to do with those counters, it's great. If you have ways to blink it, it can get better. A creature with a ton of value. All right, so that's all of the monocolored cards in the set, and let's just talk briefly about a few of these multicolored cards, because they were some of the more powerful cards in the set. One of the cards that was banned in the energy strategy is called Rogue Refiner. This is 1 green-blue for a creature human rogue, 3/2. When it ETBs, you draw a card and you get 2 energy. So cantripping 3/2 that gives you energy was deemed too powerful for standard. So if there is a Teamer energy deck in Historic, this should almost certainly go into it.
It is funny that they had to ban this card and then Hydroid Krasis, just went unscathed, and Uro made it a long time.
Yep.
Isn't that absurd?
Yep.
To think about?
Things have come along.
This card I think we'll see play in specifically the Aetherworks Marvel deck, but I don't think anywhere else, because I don't think 3 mana 3/2 draw a card aged very well. I think that the format is more powerful than that, but it will have spots. It's a niche player.
Yep, absolutely.
It is a rogue.
Yeah.
If you want to get your rogue tribal on, you want to put green in your Dimir rogue
Teamer
deck.
Rogues, Sultai rogues. Love it. Now you're talking. Yeah, I'm just going to skip down here to Whirler Virtuoso. That's another card that was a player in the energy deck. 1 blue-red, 2/3, creature of Vidalcan Artificer. When it ETBs, you get 3 energy, and you can pay 3 energy to make a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So this is one of those cards that's more powerful than you think it is. Being able to make an army of tokens is actually rather strong. So consider running this in your energy decks.
It's going to be interesting. It was kind of the payoff during that fair era of energy. And now I think its job is just to make Aetherworks Marvel go vroom.
Yep. / cover your butt while you're trying to do that. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned it before. Read for us Winding Constrictor.
black-green 2/3 creature snake. If one or more counters would be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many plus one of each of those kinds of counters are put on that permanent instead. That is a really wordy way of saying it gets one more. If you would get, as in the player, the controller of the constrictor, if you would get one or more counters, you get that many plus one of each of those kinds of counters instead.
So energy, for example.
You get one more.
Yes. So Winding Constrictor was the Conclave mentor of its day, and it is a better version of that card in almost every way. This card was very powerful. It enabled, several decks in Standard, one of which I think won a GP. So very, very strong card, and definitely a reason to be doing countery stuff. The mana's good enough in Historic to run an Abzan counters deck, so I wonder if we're going to see something like that.
Oh, you'll see it. Have fun pushing it around. You get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. It's it's going to be something. You know who you are, right? You Abzan counters players, you know who you are. Get this card.
But stop trying to brainwash the blue mages. They're never going for it. Just stop trying to push your little +1/+1 counter ways onto blue mages. We're immune to that. It doesn't even excite us, not even a little.
It's gonna work someday, CGB.
Stop it.
Just
Wrath of God.
give it
Get
to
out.
us.
Wrath of God, I'm done with you. Go away.
All right. Well, I'll go back to Commando where I belong. Okay, we've been referencing this card all day, so let's just get it on the table. CGB, read Aetherworks Marvel for us.
Aetherworks Marvel is a 4-mana legendary artifact that is mythic. Rip wild cards. Whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get an energy. That's pretty good. Tap, pay 6 energy. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order.
So this card, back in the day, they made a deck, and the whole goal of the deck was to get down Marvel on 4 and cast Ulamog, or I don't know, whatever your follow-up powerful play was, right?
Big brain magic right there.
Indeed. There was even, I think, a hot moment where people were Emra cooling off of Aetherworks Marvel, which was as gas as it sounds.
So, not kidding, Pro Tour Kaladesh, I watched this coverage recently. Pro Tour Kaladesh, it was like round 3 or something. This is like 2 weeks after set release. Somebody Aetherworks Marveled into an Ulamog, and the next turn Aetherworks Marveled into an Emrakul.
Oh my gosh. That is just... Okay, that's some grade A nonsense right there, for sure. Do you want to know what my favorite play sequence with this card was? There was some player, it's some rando, not like a well-known pro, was playing a Marvel deck, and they were playing against Hall of Famer Marcio Carvalho. So Marcio's playing an aggressive deck, and he's playing against Aetherworks Marvel, and he is expecting the Marvel to flip, and he thinks that an Ulamog is coming, so he commits his entire hand to the board because he wants to go as wide as he can to try to get around the Ulamog, and this player flips the Marvel and casts a board wipe, and people weren't doing that at the time. They weren't running board wipes in their Marvel decks, and like watching, I thought that Carvalho's eyebrows were just going to rip off the top of his head. Like, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing.
I want to say it was like a Fumigate, right?
Yeah, a Fumigate, just frickin'...
a 5-mana sorcery instead of a 10-mana win the game, but still good at instant speed. That's something we didn't talk about. You may cast the spell without paying its mana cost, means at the time that you're resolving the Marvel activation. So whatever spell you find, you can play at instant speed, like when you activate the Marvel.
Yep. So the real question again is this strong enough for Historic?
I don't think it matters early on because people are going to do stuff with it, because as much as they came to hate Aetherworks Marvel and it was banned, and for good reason, people were like, oh my god, it's so random. Well, look at the game we have now. Look at Winota, So I think even though people love to hate on these cards, they also kind of love playing these cards, as long as they're the one playing them, not the one getting played. So I think you're going to see a ton of this card. I do think it's good enough for historic, but I want to give a quick history lesson, because the way that Aetherworks Marvel worked out in the long run in its time in Standard, it wasn't the decks that were trying to hit Ulamog that turned out to be the best Marvel decks. It was just the decks playing this fair game plan with a few like 6 and 7s, like some powerful but not too expensive cards in their deck, right? That they could hit off the Marvel. So that they were just playing good cards in their deck, and they didn't have a hand where they accidentally drew 3 Ulamogs and died. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so one of the cool things with Aetherworks Marvel right now is you can run all these 7-mana mythic spell lands from Zendikar Rising.
That's a cool idea. Yeah.
So you have all these 7-mana cards in your deck that are lands, and it makes it so your Marvel is cheating on mana more often. Getting those effects for free is way better for the most part. Obviously not Agadeem's Awakening and Shatterskull Smashing. We're talking Turn Timber Symbiosis, Omiri's Call, maybe Seagate Restoration. Like, that's pretty exciting. And aside from that, we talked about Torrential Gearhulk and Sublime Epiphany. Like, hitting Sublime Epiphany with this sounds so nuts. It sounds crazy.
Could we see a world in which we have maybe like some kind of Tima ramp deck which plays the Marvel and tries to hit, Ugins, maybe
sure.
Genesis Ultimatum.
Genesis Ultimatum. Yeah, and Genesis Ultimatum can hit more energy cards and another Marvel.
At instant speed, by the way. So,
yeah, baby.
And I mean, come on, like, if you spin your Marvel and the worst thing that you hit is a Nissa, that's not bad, right? If you didn't have a Nissa, free Nissa, that's pretty good.
Free instant speed Nissa?
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, so, I don't know. We could see something like that. That could be pretty gas, I think.
I think you're right. That sounds awesome.
Yep. Basically, put this into existing good decks and see what happens. Next card on the list that CGB hates, which I am going to read just because he hates, but which you will see played in Historic, all right? Bomat Karya, fan favorite. It is an artifact creature costing 1 colorless mana. It is a 1/1 creature construct with haste. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. Then, at instant speed at any point, you can pay red and discard your hand, sacrifice Bomat Courier, put all the cards exiled with Bomat Courier into their owner's hands. So, this was an annoying little, like, kind of janky attacker, which just quietly builds up card advantage until you've run your red deck out of gas, and then you just sacrifice it and refill your hand and keep the beats coming. So, you seem to think this is going to see play in Historic?
It will, because some people love it. It will, because decks I like to play hate it, because I don't want to spend my time trying to kill your 1-mana 1/1. I want to accumulate some value, gain some life, wrath the board, and then take over with Teferi. But Bomat Courier laughs at that strategy because you can't ignore this card. Once it has 3 or 4 cards underneath it, if I go to wrath the board, the opponent just draws a new hand.
Yep.
It's so infuriating. I think the card is trash against, say, Gruul aggro or anything with Mayhem Devil, but it's so good against control decks that there's no way the red mages won't run it.
Yeah. It is just sweet, and it's fun, and it's all the things you said, and it's all the things that red mages love to do, right?
I called it terrible and annoying. What are you...
I mean, it is that too.
Sweet and fun and all the things you said. Magic is complicated.
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, basically, yeah, if you're like a red aggro mage, consider putting some of these in your sideboard. You get your money's worth out of it for sure. Things start to get crazy when you have like Light Up the Stage and Bomat Courier, and it's just like
it's messed up. It's unnatural.
The card
shouldn't be allowed.
Trees just spiral out of control, man. Whoever thought that red would draw so many cards?
Give me back Ancestral Recall and I'll be okay with this.
Speaking of vehicles, this seems to be the one playable vehicle that we actually got in this set. So read us this card, CDB.
So it's playable because it's such a hitter. Like, it hits. This is 2 mana Heart of Kirin. This is 2 mana mythic 4/4 legendary artifact vehicle. I'm sensing a trend. There are a lot of cards we're calling playable that are mythic. Anyway, Flying Vigilance, Crew 3. So you have to tap. People should know how vehicles work. They've been in sets, but you need a 3-power creature or assembled 3-power of creatures. But this is kind of the fun little bonus line of text here. You may remove a loyalty counter from a planeswalker you control rather than pay Heart of Kiran's crew cost. So, in its day, that wasn't very important. It was nice with Chandra, but for the most part, planeswalkers weren't that important.
I mean, but Gideon ally of Zendikar, dude.
Yeah. That I'm thinking of the standard after that rotate, but you're right. Gideon was definitely a crewer.
Yeah,
no problem. He'll be coming along, with the next few remasters.
We'll
but I'm thinking of all the War of the Spark planeswalkers, dude.
Oh yeah.
Like, can you imagine if we still had Teferi with Heart of Kiran?
Dude, think about how amazing Heart of Kiran plays with Nissa. Like,
I don't want to.
Like Crew 3, they were made for each other, man.
Narset?
Oh, Narset, yeah.
Narset protects herself now.
It's true.
She usually has that one extra activation where she just sits there on one loyalty and dies. But now if the opponent attacks her, you just crew up your 4/4.
Yeah, you're right. This card does play very well with 3-mana planeswalkers. It's a nice curve.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The Royal Scions just got that power boost they've been looking for.
Dude, that's actually one of my favorite janky combos. It lets you hit for 6 in the air on turn 3. That's pretty fun, man.
I'm legitimately upset that there is no way to make Oko legal just to experience what this plus Oko would have been.
Nightmare, dude. Utter nightmare. The only answer to that is your opponent's Oko.
Yeah, you have to elk the Heart of Kiran, but then you just attack your opponent's Oko with the food token that you elk and your elked Heart of Kiran, and their Oko's dead. So, like, the best answer to it doesn't stop your Oko. Why are we talking about Okomirs?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I can't help myself.
The world would look very different if we could still play Oko. But yeah, Heart of Kiran is a destroyer. This card smashes face. It also blocks very well. It does both because it has vigilance. So also just a great thing to put your summoning sick creatures into. So for people who've never played this card, CGB, are we playing this in a deck without planeswalkers?
Yeah, you can play it without planeswalkers because as long as you have cheap cards that can crew the Heart of Kiran that add up to 3 power pretty easily or just come with 3 power, you can play this card. How many you want to play is going to be a little questionable. Like your green aggressive deck or your Jund Mayhem Devil Woe Strider deck might want 1 or 2, right? Because they're legendary. You don't want to draw multiples, mess your draw up. If you're a Collected Company deck, you really have to question whether or not you run this card because it's not a hit for Collected Company. But this thing is a slugger, and I think it's going to be worth considering in a number of different builds.
So here's a few interesting things that you can do with Heart of Kiran, all right? Playing this on turn 2 and then playing a Oro on turn 3. Pretty solid little combo right there.
You can use full control you have to turn on full control, but yeah, before you sacrifice the Uro, you can use it to crew the Heart of Kiran.
Yep. So you can do some fun little stuff like that. It can be surprisingly good at killing your opponent's planeswalkers. So if you're having problems with your opponent's Nissa, for example, this can be a good way to just double tap her, get her out of there. So we can play Heart of Kiran in Planeswalker Light or decks that don't play Planeswalkers. How many Planeswalkers are we playing before we consider putting Heart of Kiran in our mostly Planeswalker deck?
You're playing a mostly Planeswalker deck.
Well,
who cares?
Okay, I phrased it wrong. A deck that doesn't really play creatures, but that does play Planeswalkers. How many are we, like a control deck, for example? Would you ever run this in a control deck with 12 Planeswalkers? Probably not. Okay.
I mean, it does depend on how much those Planeswalkers cost. I don't know, if you're running 4 Narsets and an Ashiok and some other 3-mana Planeswalker like a Jace, I don't know, maybe. It depends.
Maybe in your deck with the Amonkhet Gideon.
Okay, yeah, like Grixis Super Friends, just have at it, or something like that. Why not?
Well, it's a very versatile and very powerful card. If you want to play this card, don't go nuts with it, all right? Like, craft 1, craft 2, and kind of see how it goes, all right? This is not a craft 4 and jam them into your deck kind of a mythic. So get that out of your head right now.
I'm going to do that, though. Mardu Vehicles, let's go. Craft 4. Yep.
Give it to me. So
yeah, I will.
Let's talk about that.
I'm going to give it to you.
Let's talk about that deck briefly. Mardu Vehicles was a very, very good, very fast, very aggressive deck in Standard. It played the Toolcraft Exemplar. It did play Heart of Kiran's. It played some Planeswalkers like the Chandra that we talked about today. We don't have some of the Planeswalkers it played, but we could find some stand-ins if we wanted to. It played a card we didn't read in this set review, but Unlicensed Disintegration. That's a pretty strong removal spell. If you have artifacts, it deals damage to your opponent if you do. But I would say that we're missing some of the pieces that made it good, like Thraben Inspector, for example.
Thraben Inspector was fine, but I'm confident that we'll find good aggressive options lurking about.
So pay attention to CGB's channel in the coming weeks, because he'll probably be taking some version of the deck for a spin in Historic.
Why not? Should be fun. Have that nostalgia.
Okay, a card you're probably going to see in some tribal decks in Historic is called Metallic Mimic. 2 colorless, artifact creature shapeshifter at 2/1. As it ETBs, choose a creature type. The Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So this is definitely a tribal payoff kind of a card. Powerful enough for Historic?
I mean, you can't stop the merfolk vampire nerds from doing what they're going to do. You just can't stop them. And this card is just more reason to do it.
Indeed. This is one of those cards where like it looks powerful, but then I always think I could either play this or I could just play a relevant creature of the type that I want to play instead.
For example, you don't want to play this in Goblins with Muxus because it won't get hit by Muxus.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you don't want to play that.
And you have other goblins you want to play, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the question is like which deck exactly wants. Maybe if you have a tribe that's like a couple short, you know?
Yeah, elves, goblins, merfolk are probably itching for it. I'm exposing. I might not be a completely soulless control psychopath. I kind of want to try it in rogues.
Interesting. What's the big draw though in rogues?
The creatures aren't that powerful. Yeah, now they are.
Makes the counter.
Yeah. You just make them a little bit bigger so they can go toe to toe with the things because they're already cheap. You've got kind of lord effects, but now you've got like rate, like good rate outside of Thieves Guild Enforcer. You have solid rate cards, and I don't know. I'm interested.
Here's another nice thing about it. If you're playing like a 2-color or 3-color, like an aggro tribal deck, for example, the Mimic can be nice because it's just colorless, right? You can just fill out your curve if you're having mana trouble, so it's kind of a nice thing about it too. So yeah, this card's seen play in a variety of formats, so, don't write it off. So you alluded to this card earlier. Saffron Olive is probably going to not be able to peel himself away from Arena for the next ever, basically, now that this card is on Arena. Why don't you read Panharmonicon for us?
All right, but if I do that, you have to tell me what you're going to do with it.
Okay.
So you start thinking about that.
Deal.
Panharmonicon, 4 colorless for an artifact rare. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Some quick examples to give Arjuna a minute would be, like, it's a lot like Yarok, right? But not a land. Yarok triggered like any permanent entering the battlefield. This is a creature or artifact. But if a creature or artifact triggers an enchantment, it creates 2 of that effect. An example is Mirror March. There would be 2 coin flips because the creature entering the battlefield caused the Mirror March to trigger. Now that I have explained this, what are you doing with this pile of nonsense?
You know what I was trying to figure out is, like, what artifacts are we going to abuse with this? If you play a golden egg with this out, you draw 2 cards, right?
Wow, you went for the moon on that one.
I mean, that's pretty gas. Because, okay, there's so many ETB creatures, right? But we rarely get like a artifact ETB doubler. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Glass casket.
Yeah.
Puts 2 creatures under it, and you can Yorion to get the glass casket after you've played the both before you play the Harmonicon, and then you do it again after you have the Harmonicon in play.
Yeah, now we're talking. Okay, so a new example of a creature that got pretty good with this is the Skyclave Shade.
Yeah, that card is hype.
That's gonna be
card's
pretty
amazing.
gas, right?
Sure, just 2 exile effects. It's kind of glorious.
Boom.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Done. Got him.
All right. I'm not like the eminent Yarok player, so I can't just rattle off a list of combos. You did mention it earlier, the Torrential Gearhulk, or any of the Gearhulks really can abuse this card.
Here's the other thing. This isn't legendary.
Yeah, that's true.
So you can like Mythos of a Luna to make another one, or whatever garbage you want to play. I don't know. You can have, if you figure out how to get like 2 or 3 of these on the battlefield, it gets funny. It gets really funny really fast.
I mean, you can have a lot of fun with your Baron Talarian Archmage, bounce all the fools. Oh, okay. Hold up. Big brain moment here.
Boom.
Edgewall Innkeeper triggers twice, right?
No, because it's a cast ability, right?
Is it a cast? Okay.
So it says a artifact or creature entering the battlefield. Causes.
All right.
Yep.
Woo. Well, we dodged a bullet there because that would have been...
You were looking to do a Lucky Clover deck. Oh my gosh, you're so predictable.
Hey, I know what I like, man.
I guess so, man. How about Combustible Gearhulk?
Yeah, it's a solid choice. Can't argue with that. How about Terror of the Peaks?
That's pretty nasty. That's a lot of damage. I don't like it because it ends the game too quickly. You're supposed to just accumulate more nonsense.
How about Oro and Croxa?
Well, you'd have to sacrifice them twice. That sounds like a pretty steep ask.
Pretty rough.
Okay, Uro drawing 2 cards and gaining 6 life is kind of disgusting.
Kind of amazing, right?
It's It's
okay.
Nice.
So there's a lot basically happening. This does work with the Constrictor we were talking about earlier.
If it depends.
If it's an ETB effect, I guess.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to see some kind of Beast Whisperer shenanigans going off with Panharmonicon.
That's a cast effect.
Oh, is it? Damn it.
I think it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought it was.
All of my favorite combos don't work.
I'm
over it. I'm off it. I'm off it. Move along.
Somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong about Beast Whisperer, and if so, that's fine.
Anyway, the point is this card is janky and fun. It's probably not good enough for Historic, but people are going to try it, and it's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm. Strong agree that it is a very fun card. That with Genesis Ultimatum is probably even more nonsense.
Oh, gosh. So basically, if you want to know all of the things you can do with Panharmonicon, just follow Saffron Olive for the next month, and you will learn exactly all of the nonsense you can get up to with this card. It's basically his favorite Magic card ever printed. So if you're not familiar with Saffron Olive, he's a member of MTG Goldfish. They have an awesome podcast, and they also release cool content on YouTube. Saffron's just a great content creator. Okay, there's a bunch of other fun artifacts, but in the interest of everyone's time, we're going to skip over them here. But we do have to talk about some important lands which are being added to the pool, because these are some of the stronger lands in Magic's history, to be honest. Quickly, we'll start with Aether Hub. This isn't in the category of strongest, but it's still worth looking at. When it ETBs, you get an energy. It taps to add a colorless, and you can tap and pay energy to add 1 mana of any color. So in any energy deck, this is basically a 5-color land. That's pretty good.
Yeah, which is kind of nuts.
Yep.
Just that is an energy payoff for sure.
It is.
So lots of Aether Hubs will get used.
It is
for sure.
And it gives you a free energy. So if you don't need to use that energy, like if your other lands are providing all the colored mana you need, then you just got spotted a free energy, which is awesome. I think the real headliner here is that this set contains fast lands. Now, fast lands are basically, they're almost like the opposite of Fabled Passage. So let's read an example here. Blooming Marsh. These are all at rare, by the way. Blooming Marsh enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands, and it taps to add green or black. So these are dual lands which pay you off for playing them early. And so decks that are really excited about these fast lands are like aggro decks, / any deck that cares about getting on the board turn 1, turn 2.
Several things, because they actually create really unique deck building choices in Historic. First of all, there are 5 of these, and they are the what is known as the enemy colors. So there's green and black, there's black and white, there's blue and green, there's red and white, and there's blue, and there's red and blue.
Yep.
So no like Azorius, no blue white, no blue black like Dimir, no red black like Rakdos. And the reason that's important is because the check lands are already in Historic, which Drowned Catacomb, Rootbound Crag, and those require a basic land type to enter the battlefield untapped, like in Rootbound Crag's case, a forest or a mountain. Whereas these Concealed Courtyard, Botanical Sanctum, the fast lands, they are not a land type, so they do not have like plains and mountain on them in the case of Inspired Vantage. So you can see that it's kind of weird. If you want to run the check lands, you need to play with like regular basics or cards with a type, like Sacred Foundry and the shock lands, right?
Oh, the Triomes, yeah.
Or the Triomes, yep. But if you're going to play with fast lands, you probably can't play those in a deck that also has check lands because you need the types. So the shock lands, you still can play shock lands with these very easily. But it's interesting because if you're playing an enemy colored group of cards, you probably don't play the check lands at all. You probably play the fast lands instead along with the shock lands. And it makes the aggressive mana bases really good in the decks that have like Inspired like a fast land and a shock land. Like those aggressive mana bases now have 8 dual lands of 1 color pair. So for the first time in a long time, like 3 and possibly even 4 color aggro decks that curve out with good mana are reasonably playable, but you don't want check lands in those decks. So the deck building restrictions are interesting, and compounding them is Nissa Who Shakes the World, because none of these fast lands are forests, so none of them will double their mana output with Nissa. So you really have to look at what your deck's trying to do. A Nissa deck might not want any of these or might want fewer of these. A buddy-colored deck or mostly buddy-colored deck like Gruul or Naya probably has no use for these, but a Boros deck or a black-white deck or a Mardu deck probably wants to run a lot of these and none of the check lands. So at least for a little while, we're going to have to rethink mana bases in Historic based on these cards. And they will, I think, in the long run, be the most played cards in Historic from Kaladesh Remastered.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When you look at any given format, the number of playable lands in that format, they come down to these clutch cycles, and they really lay out the foundation of what's possible in a format. So having a cycle like this added to Historic is huge. It's hard to convey how important mana bases are to what is possible in a format, the kinds of things that you're aspiring to do. So just take notes of these, because we don't get these every set. Shock lands, check lands, fast lands, triomes, they only come around once in a while, and they're extremely important. So that alone would be a reason to invest in some packs or play some limited, or however you want to get your hands on this set. To get your hands on some of these, I think is important.
Yeah, and I would say there haven't, like, in 3-color decks, we've kind of the turn 1 Thoughtseize has cost us 4 life.
Yeah,
for a while now, and now doesn't really have to. These are pain-free lands.
Yep. And that's one of the interesting things is people think that you just play these in aggro decks, but I actually remember a fair number of control decks playing these as well.
Oh, yeah. You do.
Because they wanted to play Fatal Push, right? They wanted to play, stuff like Thoughtseize, or they wanted to reliably be able to cast that 2-mana counterspell, stuff like that. So don't underestimate these in any style of deck. I mean, if you have plays that you want to do early, whether it's proactive or reactive, consider these. And the final thing to think is you have to consider your curve with lands. So, for example, with lands like Fabled Passage, they enable you to quite frequently cast your 4-drops on curve, whereas like your 3-drops, maybe you don't cast those on curve with cards like Fabled Passage. So it's kind of the same thing with this. The breaking point with these is actually 4 mana. These come in tapped when you reach. When this is your 4th land that you play, they come in tapped. So just think about that as well. Like if you have really high impact 4 mana plays that you want to be making, then these might not be the best choice. These are probably better in decks that like run Uro, for example, because you can play your Uro on 3 and you can, put down your Vantage and the tap clause isn't such a disadvantage in a deck like that. So just be thinking about your curve as well, because these do enable you in turns 1 through 3, and then they bite you in the later turns of the game.
Man, think about it. Historic is going to have shock lands, check lands, fast lands, triomes, and am I missing one? Oh yeah, pathways.
Got pathways now.
That's a lot of good mana.
A lot of lands, dude. Yeah, we don't have fetch lands, like actual fetch lands, but we're probably basically fetch lands away from having about as versatile of a mana base as Modern has. That's not exactly true. Modern has all kinds of lands, but all of the cards that we listed are some of the main players. I mean, these really are just some of the most important lands in Magic's history. So yeah, Historic is definitely... it's a good time to be casting spells in Historic, I tell you what.
Can I tell you something dumb about Commander as our kind of outro?
Yeah.
As our lead out?
Yeah, lay it on me.
Dude, I was playing a game of Commander, and I sacrificed a Bloodstained Mire on turn 1, and I fetched a Triome.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's
I just wanted to share. I just wanted to share, dude. Just wanted to tell the people about that experience.
So, when Wizards ceases to become cowards and they reprint fetch lands into Standard, then you too will get to experience the power. But as it stands, there will remain reminiscences of the Paper Boomer generation. And hopefully you, us, generation of Zoomers, can appreciate some of these cards as they enter our formats. And I hope that you will do that with Kaladesh, because this format is sweet. It's very, very sweet, and I'm looking forward to playing a lot of it. All right, thank you for joining us for this lengthy episode. Trust me, CGB and I, we always strive to keep these as short as we can, and we almost invariably fail. And catch us next week. I'm actually going to be having a guest on the show to talk about Limited, Kaladesh Limited. So you will get to hear a lot more about this set next week, and then, fear not, we will return to the constructed formats that everybody know and love. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find us on all of the platforms. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes. We're on YouTube. Shout out to our YouTube listeners. Y'all are killing it. You can find Covert Go Blue on his channel, YouTube. Go look for Covert Go Blue there. He also streams Monday through Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern. That's going to do it. And catch you a couple weeks from now, CGB.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just over here shuffling from that fetch land I cracked about 5 minutes ago. Later, everybody.
And it is none other, the one, the only, Fatal Push. This
got it.
You got it. Yeah,
fatality.
Baby. All right.
Got fatality achieved.
You paid 1 black mana to destroy that little part.
I tried to time it too with your
love it.
with your conversation.
Boom.
Boom.